Call the Honourable Jock Ferguson.
Good, thank you, Mr. President. Firstly, I would like to congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election, and I look forward to making a contribution in this place under the guidance of your gavel, which I am certain will be measured and fair. As I rise to introduce myself in this House, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Noongar people, the traditional owners of this land on which we meet today. I am mindful of their ongoing cultural and spiritual connection to the lands of the Southwest, and I pay my respect to their elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge some of the past members for the East Metropolitan Region, the now Senator Louise Pratt, the Honourable Nick Griffiths, and the Honourable Bartong Pham for all the good work in this place, and I sincerely wish them well. I sincerely wish them all the best in their future endeavours. I am truly honoured to stand in this place today on behalf of the Australian Labor Party, Mr. President, and the people of the East Metropolitan Region of Western Australia who have put their trust and faith in me. It is a great privilege that has been bestowed on me, and I will honour that trust and faith at all times. Today I would like to talk a little bit about some of the experiences that have shaped my life and career, and in turn the values that I hold close. No doubt you'll have noticed, Mr. President, I have not always lived in Western Australia. My accent, which, believe it or not, has been somewhat tempered over the years by Australian influences, has given me the dubious honour of being the only union official in the country who had to appear in a headline news story on a commercial television station with subtitles. True story. Hopefully I'm understood by the members of this place without such an aid. I was born and raised in a working class area of Postle Park, Glasgow, to an unwed Catholic woman. Such was the stigma attached to unmarried mothers and illegitimate children in those times. My mother was sent away to a convent outside of Glasgow for some months before I was born. I was very fortunate to be raised by my grandparents, believing that they were my parents for many years, and not knowing that my sister was in fact my mother. It was a situation not unusual in the community at that time. It was not until nearly 8 years ago that I was made aware of the full extent of my mother's story. 2 years after I was born, she had another child, this time a girl, who, with the assistance of the Catholic Church, was adopted outside the family. Life went on for this young girl, who eventually discovered, in a most upsetting way, that she was adopted. It was never discussed openly and remained a taboo subject in her adopted family. Some years later, following the death of her adopted mother, my sister began to search for her birth mother, the woman I had believed was my sister. Her name was Molly. She searched on and off for many years to no avail. With little or no help was provided to her by the various organisations and government agencies. So secretive and taboo was the issue. Eventually she made contact with the husband of one of my mother's cousins, who, when asked if he knew about a child, replied yes, that the family was aware that Molly had a son. Shocked and surprised, she realised that she had a brother, and then quickly tracked me down. My sister had never given up, tracing through records, asking questions, writing letters, door knocking in some of the toughest areas in Glasgow where we had lived, and she was ultimately successful in finding me. Unfortunately, she never got to meet our mother, who had passed away some years earlier. The reason I relate this part of my history is because it is a very human story, steeped in prejudice and secrets that had tragic consequences for my family. There existed not just the prejudice and shame of being born illegitimately into a Catholic community, but the revelation that my sister and I are believed to be full-blood siblings. Divided for most of our lives due to religious bigotry and discrimination, our mother was Catholic and our father was Protestant, and they were forbidden to marry. Of all my life experiences, the discovery of my sister in parentage has highlighted the truly cataclysmic effect that ignorance and discrimination can have on the everyday lives and experiences of families and individuals. My sister was robbed of ever meeting her mother, and when we were separated from each other for over 50 years. I intend to work hard in this place, Mr. President, to build positive changes out of this personal experience, to ensure that as lawmakers, we're always working towards breaking down some of the barriers and prejudice that exclude people and their families from fully participating in our society and achieving personal fulfilment. I value the diversity of the electorate that I now represent, and I believe that there is great value in working towards strong communities where everyone is respected, valued, and have a choice, regardless of their age, faith, race, sexual preference, gender, or disability. As I indicated previously, I was born in a place called Postle Park. It's a part of Glasgow that has an interesting history and some pertinent lessons for us, given the current economic climate and the continued drift of manufacturing jobs overseas. The area, which had served as the country residence of Glasgow merchant John Campbell, was partially sold to a Walter McFarlane in 1849 to expand his Saracen iron foundry works. With new railway access to the area and McFarlane's grand vision, Postle Park went from being residence for 10 people in 1872 to well over 10,000 by 1891. It was described by the Glasgow Town Council as one of the finest and best conducted developments in the city, the beating heart of Glasgow, which at that time was the second city of the British Empire after London. Distinctly a working class area, Postle Park provided labour to the foundry, engineering, railway works and other manufacturing firms that set up in the area, and it had a very strong and vibrant community life. In the mid-1960s, the foundry was taken over, closed and demolished, all within a 3-year period. In the following decade across Glasgow, a host of metalworks, shipyards and engineering plants closed, and the work moved offshore. Between the mid-70s and early 90s, Glasgow lost 2/3 of the 107,515 manufacturing jobs its residents had relied on. The service industry jobs that the government insisted would replace them never eventuated in the required numbers. This was a situation replicated throughout the manufacturing sectors of much of the west of Scotland. By the 80s, only 15 years after the closing of the foundry around which Postle Park was built, became, as the United Kingdom Evening Times put it, the hub of one of Britain's only expanding industry in the 1980s, the heroin trade. The once strong and vibrant community had fallen victim to a cascading loss of jobs and increased instability and anxiety among the few who had managed to maintain some sort of employment. Dignified work, as we all know, is central to how the members of any community realise their place in society, and it is crucial in maintaining a sense of personal dignity and self-worth. The people of Postle Park, for decades after the stripping of their industries and the loss of their jobs, suffered the consequences, with deeply entrenched long-term unemployment, high crime rates, the scourge of drugs and violence, one of the lowest life expectancies in Britain, and significant numbers of people suffering from malnutrition and other conditions associated with tremendous poverty. Although an extreme example, Mr. President, Postle Park is not wholly unlike our own communities, past and present in Western Australia. The community was built around the manufacturing industry, and when that was destroyed, the area was deeply wounded, and it bears the scars to this day. In the current times of economic uncertainty, many communities have been maimed by the loss of significant industry or manufacturing. Ravensthorpe is one that comes to mind quickly. In my own electorate, for example, many communities in the southeastern corridor rely on a strong manufacturing sector to provide employment in places like Rockingham and Kwinana, and would be devastated if there was to be a further significant reduction in the industry's capacity. My career history has been largely in the manufacturing sector or representing workers in the manufacturing sector, but it did all begin in Pottsville Park under the tutelage of my grandfather, who was a convener of the Boilermakers Union and a member of the Communist Party. My union career began as the fitter's apprentice delegate on my first job at just 17, and keen to get a share of the new tradesperson's pay deal and full of youthful exuberance, myself and the apprentice Boilermakers delegate pulled the job up with the intention of staying out until the apprentices got their share. It lasted only long enough to be summoned to the yard manager's office and informed that as an apprentice our indentures didn't allow us to take strike action, and every one of the nearly 200 apprentices in the yard would be sacked. Although shocked, I took the news decidedly better than the Boilermakers delegate, who burst into tears in the office saying, "My mammy's going to kill me." Crestfallen, we bumped into my grandfather when exiting the office, and after he heard the story, brief negotiations were carried out with the yard manager and his threat wasn't acted upon. Needless to say, I recognised I had a lot to learn about negotiations, I had a lot to learn about strategy, and my grandfather's words still ring in my ears: never, ever, ever do that again. And I haven't. And to this day, I still don't know whether I was set up by my grandfather and the yard boss or whatever, but anyway. When I did leave Scotland, it was by sea. And as a member of the British Merchant Navy, travelling the world for 5 years, ending up in New Zealand, I eventually found my way across the Tasman and across the continent to Western Australia. I spent a significant amount of time in the Pilbara and Gascoyne regions working as a fitter, and I became a shop steward and then the convener of the Metalworkers Union at Dampier Salt in the northwest. I later became an appointed organiser on stage 2 of the Northwest Shelf project before being elected as the Northwest organiser. I was then elected as Assistant State Secretary of the now Australian Manufacturing Workers Union under John Sharp-Collett, the State Secretary, before accepting the honour of leading the MWU as State Secretary in the year 2000. It has been a great honour to serve in various positions in the MWU, one of the most progressive left unions in Australia, concerned not only with improving wages and conditions of Australian workers, although that remains a top priority, but with social justice, human rights and sustainability issues. For example, the MWU has continued to take a long-term and progressive view on the issue of climate change. The union recognises not only the opportunity to build new industries and create thousands of sustainable jobs, but also the growth in green jobs that would result from the greening of traditional industries. This equates to supporting new industries based on renewable energy technologies, including geothermal energy, solar technology and tidal energy, but also working with existing industries and employers to reduce waste and increase recycling measures. There is clearly great support in the community I represent for green initiatives, with thousands of my constituents participating in recycle initiatives or making small and large daily changes to reduce their footprint on the environment. I believe that the members of this place have a crucial role to play in the future expansion of these new industries and initiatives, and inaction on our part is no longer a viable option. The work that I have done in the past has always been focusing on ensuring that Western Australia has a strong and sustainable manufacturing sector, and that this valuable industry continues to grow into the future. I have worked with governments of both persuasions to ensure that there is significant investment in infrastructure, and I'm pleased to have been involved in the development of the Australian Marine Complex. From its inception in 1998-99, I worked very closely with the Honourable Hendy Cowan, who was a strong supporter of local content, when it was known as the Jervis Bay Project. I was a member of the Liaison Committee for the Australian Marine Complex Common User Facility, which provides open access infrastructure for companies to service the marine, defence, resource and oil and gas industries. The Common User Facility has enabled Western Australian-based companies to secure and deliver fabrication and assembly projects for large infrastructure modules used in mining and oil and gas projects, both locally and internationally, as well as complete maintenance work for commercial and Royal and Australian Navy vessels. I was a member of the WA Skills Advisory Board and State Training Board and worked on reforming apprenticeship and traineeship systems to ensure that we have people with the right skills required by industry. And I worked very closely with the previous minister, the Honourable Liliana Ravlich, where we made tremendous changes in regards to the apprenticeship system. I have lobbied big business and government to break down tenders into bite-sized chunks to ensure small and medium-sized local firms and local suppliers get a fair go, rather than the omnibus tenders that smaller and local firms can't possibly supply. I was a member of the State Supply Commission and worked hard to ensure that where possible government procurement supported Western Australia industry. I have also sat on a number of other boards, including the West Australian Manufacturing Industry Consultative Council, the Oil and Gas Industry Coordinating Council, and the Industry Capability Network Advisory Board. The value of these boards can be easily demonstrated. For example, the Tripartite Oil and Gas Coordinating Council has been effective in addressing a number of issues facing the industry and was also instrumental in attracting a substantial subsea oil and gas industry to Western Australia. And in saying that, Mr. President, it was great concern that I know that none of these boards have met since this current government's election last September. And I would ask the government to review their position in that regard. Working on these boards have given me extensive experience working in and around governments to facilitate better outcomes for the West Australian manufacturing sector, and in turn the workers in this industry. I have a history of working extensively with employers and government to attract lucrative contracts to the state and overall build the capacity of our industry, creating jobs and increasing productivity. I believe that there's always more that can be done, and I will work to ensure that the current government invests in infrastructure, invests in skills, maintains procurement practices that do not discriminate against local companies, and that it acts to support local jobs, particularly in this current economic climate. Now, Mr. President, I know that a number of the honourable members opposite support this issue of local content and local manufacturing. In fact, and it's a pity he's not here tonight, but the first time I met the Honourable Simon O'Brien, we shared a sausage on a picket line in Kwinana during a long dispute with a company who had imported a whole fertiliser plant from South Africa to the detriment of local business. When I say I shared the sausage, he ate the sausage and I ate the bun. I don't eat sausages. The workers were very grateful, because I knew what was in them. The workers were very grateful for his support then, and so I hope that the Minister for Transport is continuing to carry the flag at the Cabinet table, supporting the manufacturing industry and educating his colleagues on why it is so important to supply this industry for future generations. As all new members do, I have a number of people to whom I owe a great debt of gratitude. And I would like to recognise some of my comrades who have mentored, guided and assisted me in my time at the AMWU as an official and as secretary. The late Harold Peden, who was state president of the AMWU, Julius Rowe, who is the national president of the AMWU, Dave Oliver, present national secretary of the AMWU, Senator Doug Cameron, ex-national secretary of the AMWU, who from time to time I've been mistaken for, and my very dear friend Keith Peckham, ex-state president. I would also like to thank all the state secretaries of the AMWU who have assisted me in the past, and in particular Paul Bastian, the State Secretary of New South Wales. The present WA branch of the AMWU, under the compelling leadership of the Secretary Steve McCartney, Mr. President, are doing a tremendous work, particularly in the area of job creation and the recognition of the importance of Aboriginal culture and training in the North West. Steve McCartney is a man of integrity, intelligence and vision, and a very good friend. I wish him and all the officials and staff of the MWU my best wishes for their future endeavours. I already feel very comfortable standing here today, Mr. President, particularly because now I spend my days, sitting days, sitting next to my best mate, the Honourable John Ford. We are both proud members of the MWU, and we're both fitters. And I thank him for the many years of invaluable friendship and support. I would also like to thank the Honourable Sally Talbot for her wise counsel and firm friendship. And I think the Leader of the Opposition is a wonderful person. I just thought I'd put that in there. To my... yeah, lick. To my electorate staff, Cindy Portland and Claire Comrie, thank you for your efficiency. I think they're up there somewhere. Thank you for your efficiency, guidance and good humour. I look forward to working with you for the people of the East Metropolitan Region. To many other friends and comrades, Stephen Dawson, Dennis Lidlow, Senator Louise Pratt, Andy Duffy, Alan Stewart and his partner Sue, Neil Byrne, Joe Craig and his wife Betty, who are no doubt looking at this streaming on the internet in Texas. Thank you for, and Daniel and Amelia Kennedy. Thank you for all your hard work over the years, advancing the interests of working people. But more importantly, thank you for your friendship. And to my children, and I'll do this in chronological order, Mr. President. As I say, we're pretty poor in Potter Park, we don't have television. Ian, Stephen, David, Andrew, James, Stephanie, Sean and Claire. And to my grandchildren, Nathan, Reese and Jessie. You have taught me so much and brought such infinite joy into my life. Thank you for all your understanding and support, and I love you all so very much. Obviously, I'd like to give a special thanks to my sister Monica, particularly for never giving up. And I hope to have as many years with her as we have had apart. I think she's watching this streaming from Scotland as we speak, and I love you, Monica. I would like to give special recognition to my partner, Tina, who's, oh, I can see her up there, who I must say has had to put up with a considerable amount over the years, looking after me. I recognise it's not been an easy task, working full-time, running a household, and having a partner with a career that demands a lot of time away from home. I thank her for her love and support in what were often difficult times. I love you and I appreciate that. In conclusion, Mr. President, finally, after leaving the MWU last year, I was presented with an award of merit for my service to the Union. And at the bottom of the certificate there is a note that sums up simply the causes that I have and will continue to dedicate my life and work to. To paraphrase, it says, "May we all see the day when the unity of the community and the workers becomes so strong that we see the end of unemployment and poverty in the midst of plenty, and it is replaced by a just and equitable system which ensures a full and happy life to all who render useful service in our society." Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, honourable members.